Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we had another very exciting day at the Global Chess League in London, so let's have a look at the games. First of all, we had the game between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Hikaru Nakamura, so let's see what happened. MVL opened up with the move e4, and I was very curious to see what Hikaru would do with the black pieces, but he stuck to his guns. He played the move c5 to Sicilian, and after knight f3, he played g6, the hyper-accelerated dragon. It's quite interesting because he played the same opening earlier in the tournament against Magnus Carlsen and also against Viswanathan Anand. So I was very interested to see what MVL had prepared. Alright, so Maxime played d4, takes, knight takes, bishop g7, and now c4, the start of the Maraxi bind. So the idea is that white, with these pawns on c4 and d4, is making it very difficult for black to ever go for a pawn break. But Hikaru goes knight c6, attacking the knight in the middle of the board, bishop e3, and now a bit of a new variation, the move queen to b6, attacking the knight on d4 once more, and attacking the pawn on b2 as well. Alright, so this is also what Hikaru played against Magnus. In that game, Magnus played a knight b5, but MVL deviates with the move knight b3, attacking the queen and saving the pawn on b2. And Hikaru goes queen d8 back. So with this move, he is inviting MVL for a move repetition. But MVL, he's a fighter, he has the white pieces, so he decided to play on and played the move queen to d2. Alright, so developing the queen, protecting the pawn on b2. Hikaru plays d6, knight c3, and knight f6, developing his knight. Alright, so f3, and now bishop e6, trying to put some pressure on that pawn on c4. Alright, so knight d5, knight d7, bishop e2, and here an excellent move by Hikaru to move a5. Aiming to go a4, kick the knight away, and maybe get to the a5 square with his own queen. Alright, so rook to b1 was played, a4, the knight jumped back into the corner, but it can jump back with knight c2, and here queen a5, offering the trade of queens. Alright, so MVL played knight to c2, and here Hikaru decided to play rook to c8, bring his rook into the game as well. Alright, so rook c8, MVL played b4. Here we had a bit of a glitch. The pawn on b4 disappeared and the pawn on b3 appeared. Fortunately, nobody noticed what actually happened. The arbiter also wasn't there, and so white simply recaptured and the game resumed. Alright, so Hikaru took on d2, MVL recaptured, and here pawn to f5. Another excellent move by Hikaru, putting pressure on the center. And already it feels like black is a very comfortable game. The only open file on the board is the a file, but it's going to be very difficult for white to ever contest that file, as the bishop on g7 is controlling that square. Alright, so MVL took on f5, Hikaru recaptured with the bishop, putting some pressure on the knight on c2. So MVL played bishop d3 to neutralize the pressure on that diagonal. But Hikaru took on d3, and here played the move e6, kicking the active knight from d5 away. Alright, so knight c3 by Maxime, and now knight to c5. A very interesting move by Hikaru, checking the king, and white has to make a decision here. Either white trades on c5, or white goes king d2, but then black has a pretty active game. MVL decided to give up his bishop for the knight, black recaptured, and it feels like this should be approximately even, right? I mean, we see that white is the slightly better pawn structure because white has 2 pawn islands, black has 3 in this isolated pawn on e6. But the king on d3 can get under some pressure. I mean, black has plenty of avenues. The king can step up, maybe then one rook to d8. The other rook can always go to a8, maybe infiltrate via the a2 square. So definitely some problems here for MVL to figure out. He played knight e4, hitting the pawn on c5. And Hikaru simply didn't care. He played king to e7, as knight d6 was also a threat. The pawn on c5 cannot be captured due to knight e5 check. Also attacking the knight, and if the king goes here, black can, let's say, give a check here. The king has to step away, you win the knight, and black is winning. Alright, so MVL played rook hd1, bringing his rook into the game. And here, a very impressive move by Hikaru. He played the move rook to a8. So sacrificing the pawn on c5, but he wants to go rook a2, rook d8, and again, go after the white king on d3. That can get under a lot of pressure. MVL takes the pawn, rook a2 instantly, threatening rook d8, attacking the queen, the king. White cannot take here to cover the square, as black goes rook b8, attacking the knight, and if the knight jumps back, now a check. The king has to move, and you take on c2, and black is winning. Alright, so MVL played knight e3, saving the knight, but here another good move by Hikaru, bishop to d4, hitting the knight on c5, also putting pressure on the knight on e3, and white's in trouble. b4 was played, rook to d8, eyeing the king on d3, and again, it's a very tough situation here for white. The only move to hold on here was the move knight b3. So you stay in this discovery, but there's no real good way for black to take advantage of it. If you give a check by moving the bishop away, the king can step up to e4. Alright, so MVL played king e4 right away, getting out of the discovery, but this was a big mistake due to rook e2, hitting the knight on e3, and unfortunately for white, there's no good way to defend. For example, if you go rook d3 to defend the knight this way, black goes bishop takes e3, and if you capture with a rook d4 is checkmate in 1. And if you go rook e1 instead to defend the knight on e3 this way, here black has bishop takes c5, with the idea that if you take the rook d4 again will be checkmate. So MVL in a world of trouble, he decided to go knight takes b7, but yeah, as I was watching the games live, this was not a good situation here for MVL. Also, I think when he played knight takes b7, we saw a very slight head shake. So Hikaru took the knight on e3, gave another check, and played rook to e2. Even though he's up a piece, he's continuing his attack. Knight a5, gave check over here, king h3, he traded off the knights, and now played rook f5, aiming to go rook h5, and again, continue to go after the white king. Now here MVL has a check on b7, king up, and take on h7 to cover this check over here. But Hikaru had calculated that here he can give his own rook, white takes, take this pawn over here, as now the second rank has opened up, and after king steps up, he can take the rook on h7. And all of a sudden we see that white only has one pawn for the bishop, which really isn't enough. Now if black gets another move here, black would love to go g5, threatening rook h4 checkmate, which is why MVL played f4, kicking the bishop away. But the bishop went to c3, hitting the pawn, a6, rook a7, attacking the pawn again, d6, rook c7, attacking the pawn on c4. MVL played rook d3 to attack the bishop. Bishop b4. Note that the pawn on c4 cannot be taken, as white is a7, threatening to queen the pawn. Black has to go here, but that hangs the bishop on c3. Right, so bishop b4 was played, bishop c5, and bishop a7. Again, the pawn on c4 is pretty weak. Rook here, rook c6, attacking the pawn. Rook here, and rook d6. Again, black is up a bishop. These pawns are not going anywhere, so white really is just a loss here. King f3, check, king back. Bishop f2, threatening a check over here. So MVL play rook a2. Now here, check is not as effective as white just goes to h4. So Hikaru realized this mistake. He just went bishop back, rook here, and rook to c3. An excellent move by Hikaru. And here, white is simply in a zugzwang. There's no good move. You cannot pass with the king, as after king h4. There's, for example, king f5, which is good. Also bishop f2, check, king here, check here, and you win the rook, and you win the game. And if you move the rook anywhere else, if you go to b4 with the rook, then black has rook a3, you lose the a pawn, and it's quite hopeless. And if you move the rook along the a file, you hang the pawn on c4. So Maxime Vachier-Lagrave resigned. So a nice game by Hikaru, nice win for his team, and it helped them as they won the match. All right, so now let's have a look at our other big matchup of today, the game between Magnus Carlsen and Viswanathan Anand. Now these two have played each other a lot in the past. This was really a banger in the early 2010s. Magnus and Vishy also played two World Championship matches in 2013 and in 2014, both won by Magnus Carlsen. So let's have a look at what happened in this match. All right, so Magnus opened the game with c4, and Vishy responded with c5 to symmetrical English. So knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, and here Magnus decides to open up the center with d4. So take, e6. Now here white has some options such as a3 or g3, or the move Magnus chose e4, grabbing more space, and Vishy played bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3 and hitting the pawn on e4. Magnus took on c6 and played bishop d3, defending that pawn, and Vishy goes e5, grabbing more space in the center himself. So castles, h3, which is often a useful waiting move in these types of positions. And Vishy decides to trade on c3 and play the move d6, solidifying his pawn on e5. And here, a very interesting choice by Magnus. I think I actually also had a game in this position against Jeffrey Zhang, I believe 2 years ago in the Chess.com Global Championship. I believe Jeffrey continued with f4, but Magnus has other intentions. He goes c5, sacrificing a full pawn. Vishy takes, but now we see that Vishy has the doubled pawns. But Vishy is a pawn ahead. And now Magnus goes f4. He wants to open up the position for his bishops. Right, so c4, Vishy aiming to distract this bishop, as then the pawn on e4 can often be hanging. So Magnus goes bishop c2. He wants to hold on to that pawn on the e4 square. Right, so take on f4. Magnus recaptures. So here we have a very interesting endgame. We see that Magnus is down a pawn, but he does have the 2 bishops. Also, these pawns over here are a little bit weak. So it feels like white definitely has enough compensation. All right, so bishop b6, rook b1, activating the rook, h6, and a4. An excellent move by Magnus. He wants to go perhaps a5 to a6, maybe rook b7, so that when he does win the a7 pawn, his a pawn will already be pretty far advanced. a5, rook b7, knight here, bishop back, and g5. Vishy gaining space on the king side and aiming to go knight f4 to bring his knight back into the game. All right, so king up, knight f4. And here, a surprising decision by Magnus. Was a little bit surprised that he just decided to give up the bishop pair that easily, but on the other hand, otherwise black wants to go knight to d3, and that would be pretty annoying as well. So Magnus took and played king f3, going after this f-pawn. All right, so rook here, rook back, take, and rook b8. So here, things were looking pretty all right for Vishy. He's activating the rook, and if you go rook b1, then black goes rook d8. So I was wondering, well, I wasn't quite sure what Magnus wanted here, but he took an f4, and after rook b2, he played rook to c1. So it feels like this position should just be a draw. We see that the material is even. Black does have these double pawns over here. White does have a majority on the king side, but it's going to be pretty difficult to set the majority in motion. But let's have a look at what happened here. Even when the position is equal, we're watching Magnus Carlsen here, the best endgame player of all time. So let's see what happened. So king f8, king e5, king e7, and king to d4. So Magnus stepping his king back, and this was the first moment where Vishy started to hesitate a little bit. I mean, Magnus is starting to create some problems. He maybe wants to push this pawn up, wants to push the other pawns as well, maybe king here. Vishy played king d6, now came a check, and the king has to move. He moved back to e7, and Magnus continues to advance on the king side with g4. Alright, so maybe here Vishy had to sit with a move like rook a2, as it's quite difficult to see what white's going to do, but he played bishop d5. And this allowed Magnus to continue advancing with h4. Now this rook on b2 is active, but it can also be a little bit shut out of the game. And in the meantime, Magnus is trying to advance. Maybe g5, maybe h5 first, and then g5. Again, he's trying to create some problems for Vishy. So Vishy played king f8, walking the king back so that the passer here will never be too dangerous. And now Magnus goes king to c5. King g7 and king d6. He further activates his king. Rook a2 and g5. All right, take. So around here, you know, you might be wondering, like, well, what is Magnus's plan? Again, he does have an extra pawn on the king side, but it's going to be pretty difficult to use that, as this pawn on f7 is stopping those pawns. But he had a pretty nice idea. After rook a3 by Vishy, Vishy's attacking this pawn over here. He played bishop to f5. So he's sacrificing the pawn on a4. But after Vishy took, now he played g6. So he not only sacrifices one pawn, he's now also sacrificing another one. But the idea is that after black takes, he goes rook g1, attacking the pawn on g6, which black cannot defend very well. And also now white has a passed e-pawn that can simply march down the board. The point is that if black goes bishop back to defend the pawn, white can go e6, attacking the bishop, and if the bishop drops back, king e7, and the bishop is actually getting trapped. Alright, so Vishy played rook to a3, hitting the pawn on c3. Magnus took the pawn, and here black is in a really tough spot. If you go into the corner, you can easily walk into a checkmating net. So Vishy played king f7, check. The king has to go back here, because if you go to e8, there will be bishop g6 and mate. So king g7, and now another excellent move, king e7. Magnus slowly but surely closing the mating net around the black king. And here it's really somewhat unfortunate for Vishy that he couldn't take the pawn on c3, because if you take, white gives a check, and after king h8, king f8, and the black king is stuck in mating net. Rook h6 is threatened, that would be mate, and rook h3 is not possible as the bishop is covering that square. So, a bit unfortunate for Vishy. Instead, he goes rook to b3, aiming to give checks along the b file, but now Magnus gives a check on g6, forcing the king into the corner, and now e6, advancing his pawn up the board, and he's creating all sorts of mating nets around the black king. a4 was played, king f6, a3, and now a check on h6, and there's nothing that black can do here. King g8, bishop h7. If the king goes to f8, then there's e7, king here, and bishop g6, and the pawn promotes. So white is winning. So Vishy played king h8, but now bishop g6, king back, and bishop f7, and Anand resigned. So a great masterclass by Magnus in the endgame. Really thought that the game was going to end in a draw, really looked equal, but with the no increment, you can always put pressure on the clock, and if you combine it with pressure on the board, you really have good chances to win. Again, really impressive display by Magnus in the endgame, as he managed to win a great game. At any rate, I hope all of you guys enjoyed this recap. I'll be live tomorrow as well, covering all of the games for you guys live, both on my YouTube and Twitch channels. So if you want to watch all of that, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow. All right, see you guys.